Forget the helicopters. Forget the headlines about justice. What you just saw happen in Venezuela wasn't a military operation. It was a panic attack. While the news is showing you a president in handcuffs, the real story is hidden in the background, buried under layers of noise. The United States didn't send special forces down there to save democracy. They didn't do it to stop drugs. They did it because the American economic machine is running on empty, and Venezuela was the only gas station left open. What you are witnessing isn't a victory. It is the desperate final move of a system that is terrified of collapsing. If you understand what happened in Caracas, you understand why the money in your bank account is in trouble. Let's strip away the noise. The media wants you to focus on the movie-style raid. They want you to talk about the daring soldiers and the tactical brilliance. That is the spectacle. That is the magic trick. Look at the left hand so you don't see what the right hand is doing. Because if you are looking at the soldiers, you aren't looking at the balance sheet. And the balance sheet is a disaster. Here is the simple truth that nobody says out loud. This was a debt collection operation carried out with gunships. There is an old rule in how the world works. Everyone pretends this rule doesn't exist, but it governs everything. The rule is this: you cannot punish the people who own the stuff you need to survive. You can try for a little while, but eventually, you have to pay up. For 23 years, the United States tried to break this rule. We sanctioned Venezuela. We froze their bank accounts. We pretended their government didn't exist. We funded their enemies. We did everything possible to crush them. And then, virtually overnight, we stopped. Why? Because the math stopped working. The media has been feeding you a very specific story for years. They tell you that America is energy independent. They show you charts saying the U.S. is the biggest oil producer on Earth. They tell you we don't need the Middle East, and we certainly don't need Latin America. That is a half-truth. And in the world of money and power, a half-truth is worse than a lie. It is a trap. Yes, the United States pumps a massive amount of oil, but oil isn't just one thing. It comes in different flavors. The oil America produces is called light, sweet crude. Think of it like champagne. It is bubbly. It is light. It is very expensive. It looks fantastic in a report. But here is the problem. America's massive refineries, the industrial heart of the country down in Texas and Louisiana, were not built for champagne. They were built 50 years ago. They were designed to chew through heavy, sour crude. This is the thick, dirty, sludge-like oil. It's like mud. So, America produces champagne, but its engine runs on mud. You cannot put champagne in a diesel truck. It destroys the engine. For decades, we had an easy fix for this. We bought the heavy sludge from Saudi Arabia. They were the gas station, and we were the loyal customers. But that relationship, it is effectively dead. Saudi Arabia isn't answering the phone anymore. They aren't interested in doing favors for Washington. They are cutting their production to keep prices high. They are shaking hands with China. The Saudi prince has made it very clear. He is done taking orders. So Washington woke up and realized they had a massive mathematical problem. The refineries were starving for that heavy oil, and it gets worse. Usually when supplies get tight, the government has a backup plan. It's called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or the SPR. This is a massive underground stockpile of oil meant for World War III. It is meant for national emergencies. It is the break glass in case of fire option. But over the last 2 years, the administration smashed the glass when there wasn't a fire. They used that emergency oil to lower gas prices right before the elections. They wanted to buy votes with cheap gas. It was like burning your furniture to heat your house for one night. Sure, the house was warm for a few hours, but now the furniture is gone and it's freezing outside. The SPR is at its lowest level since 1983. It is empty. We flooded the market with millions of barrels, and we never replaced them. So, look at the map from Washington's perspective. You are out of backup oil. Your old friends in Saudi Arabia won't sell to you. Russia is an enemy. Canada is already pumping as much as they physically can. Where do you get the heavy sludge oil you need to keep the American economy from crashing? There was only one place left: Venezuela. But there was a problem. While the U.S. was busy sanctioning Venezuela, someone else moved in. On December 28th, Venezuela signed massive energy deals with China worth $18 billion. 2 days later, American officials were begging for a meeting, not to threaten, not to fight, but to negotiate. They needed access to the very oil they spent 2 decades trying to destroy. This raid wasn't about power. It was about capitulation. It was the United States that realized that without Venezuelan oil, the dollar loses its leverage. We didn't invade because we are strong. We acted because we are running out of time. That left Washington with exactly one option. They had to look at the map and find the only place left on Earth with enough heavy oil to save them: the Orinoco Belt, Venezuela. But you have to understand something very important. This fight isn't about how much oil is in the ground. It is about what currency you use to buy it. This is the difference between a skirmish and a war. Venezuela sits on the largest pile of oil on the planet, 300 billion barrels. That is more than Saudi Arabia. That is more than the United States. It is a staggering amount of energy. But for the last few years, they haven't been pumping it. Under President Maduro, the machinery rusted. The workers left. Production fell off a cliff. So, if Venezuela isn't actually pumping oil, why is the United States so terrified? Why send the gunships? Because it's not about today, it's about tomorrow. For 50 years, the world has operated on a very simple system. It is called the petrodollar. Here is how it works in plain English. If you are Japan, Germany, or Brazil and you want to buy oil, you cannot pay with your own money. You have to convert your money into US dollars first. Then, and only then, can you buy the energy to run your country. This creates a permanent, artificial demand for American money. It forces the world to hoard dollars, and that demand gives the United States a superpower. It allows Washington to print trillions of dollars, borrow money cheaply, and run up massive debts without crashing the economy. We export our inflation to everyone else. It is a cheat code. It is the engine of American wealth. But that engine is sputtering. The check engine light is flashing red. Saudi Arabia, the anchor of this entire system, refused to sign the contract again. They are done. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, are starting to trade energy in their own currencies. And Venezuela was about to pull the trigger on the move that would kill the dollar for good. Here is the secret that panicked the White House. Venezuela wasn't just selling oil, they were preparing to fully integrate their entire energy sector into China's banking system. They were going to price their oil in Chinese yuan. Think about what that means. If China can buy Venezuela's massive oil reserves without using a single US dollar, demand for the dollar falls. If demand falls, the value falls. And if the value falls, the cost of American debt explodes. Suddenly, the cheat code stops working. The American dollar isn't backed by gold. We stopped doing that in 1971. It isn't backed by factories. We shipped those overseas years ago. The only thing backing the dollar is the agreement with Saudi Arabia. And that agreement is gone. This is why the media is distracting you. They don't want you to see that the foundation is cracking. In June 2024, the Saudi deal officially expired. They let it die. Now, Saudi Arabia accepts Chinese money. The UAE is trading billions with China in local currency. Russia sells to India in rupees. The dollar's share of the world's savings account has dropped from 71% to 58%. That sounds like a small number. It isn't. Each one of those percentage points represents $350 billion that nobody wants anymore. But the story gets darker. Venezuela didn't just wake up one day and decide to pivot. This is part of a plan that has been building for 20 years. While the United States was fighting wars in the Middle East, China was quietly buying South America. The numbers are terrifying. Trade between China and Latin America hit $518 billion last year. That is $500 billion. 20 years ago, China was a ghost in South America. Today, they are the landlord. Brazil trades more with China than with the U.S. So does Peru. So does Chile. Ecuador just signed a massive trade deal with Beijing. But it's not just paper money. It is concrete and steel. China is building the ports. They are building the roads. They are building the power plants. There is a new port in Peru called Chancay. It is massive. It was designed for one specific purpose: to ship South American resources directly to Asia, completely bypassing the United States. So when you see the news about Venezuela, realize that the U.S. is watching its own backyard get sold to its biggest rival. The U.S. needs Venezuelan oil to keep its refineries running. They need to control Venezuela to save the dollar. But they have a major problem, a problem that 4 different strategies failed to fix. The oil in Venezuela, it's already gone. Washington wants to pump it, but China already owns it. Between 2007 and 2024, China paid Venezuela $62 billion in advance. Russia threw in another $17 billion. They paid up front. That oil is mortgaged. So the United States just launched a raid to seize an asset that has already been sold to the competition. And that leaves Washington with a choice that could change the global map forever. Washington tried to stop this without firing a shot. They really did. Before the helicopters launched, the United States spent years trying 4 different strategies to break Venezuela. Every single one of them failed. First, they tried maximum pressure. These were the sanctions. The idea was simple: starve the beast. Cut off the money, and the regime falls. But Washington learned a hard lesson in physics. You can sanction a bank account, but you cannot sanction a molecule of oil. If the world needs energy, the energy finds a way out. Venezuela started using ghost ships. They turned off their trackers. They painted over the names on the hull. They sold oil for cash or gold or Chinese yuan. The oil kept moving. Strategy number 2 was the puppet king. You might remember the name Juan Guaido. The U.S. government looked at him and said, "You are the president now." They gave him millions of dollars. They gave him recognition. But there was one small problem. He didn't control anything. He couldn't command a single soldier. He couldn't open a single door in the palace. It became an international joke. By last year, even his own friends stopped answering his calls. Strategy 3 was isolation. We told the world to ignore Maduro. The world ignored us instead. Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, they all went back to doing business with Caracas. Strategy 4 was the Trojan horse. We let American companies like Chevron go back in just a little bit. We gave them tiny licenses with massive strings attached. We thought we could control the flow, but Maduro saw the trap. He realized that American deals always come with handcuffs, and that is when the intelligence report hit the desk in the Oval Office. This is the part the news anchors are skipping. This is the trigger. Caracas wasn't just surviving. They were preparing a counterattack. Financial analysts call it the nuclear option. Venezuela was days away from officially plugging its entire economy into China's banking system. They were going to price their oil, the largest reserve on the planet, not in dollars, but in a basket of currencies led by the Chinese yuan and backed by gold. This was the red line. If Venezuela pulled this off, it would prove to the world that you don't need the American banking system to be rich. It would show every country in the global south that the dollar is optional. Washington saw this as a threat to its existence. So they had a choice. They could accept that the world is changing and negotiate, or they could use the one thing they have more of than anyone else: violence. They chose the gun. Now, tactically, the raid was a masterpiece. Delta Force operatives dropped from the sky. No American casualties. They grabbed the president of a sovereign nation and put him on a boat to New York. It was perfect for TV. And that is exactly how Donald Trump watched it. He sat at Mar-a-Lago, watching the feed in real time. He told the press later, "It was amazing. You'll probably never see it, but it was like a movie." To him, it was a reality show season finale. But the credits have rolled, the show is over, and now reality is setting in, and reality is messy. At the press conference, the mask slipped. Trump was asked what happens next. He didn't talk about democracy. He didn't talk about freedom. He said, American oil companies will go in. He said the oil would come to the U.S. as reimbursement. It was a confession. We are here for the black gold. Senator Marco Rubio tried to clean up the mess the next day. He went on TV and said, No, we don't need their oil. This is about governance. But the contradiction tells you everything. Trump tells you the why. Rubio tells you the lie. They think this will be easy. They think this is Panama in 1989. Back then, George Bush sent the army in to grab a dictator named Noriega. It took a few days. It was easy. But Venezuela is not Panama. Panama is tiny. Venezuela is a giant. Panama had a massive U.S. military base right in the middle of it. Venezuela has terrain that eats armies. And most importantly, Maduro wasn't a solo act. He wasn't a dictator like Saddam Hussein, where everything revolved around one man. Maduro was just the CEO of a very large, very corrupt corporation. The system is called Chavismo. It is a network of generals, spies, and street gangs. Here is a statistic that should scare you. Venezuela has more generals per soldier than almost any army on earth. Why? Because being a general in Venezuela isn't a military job. It is a business opportunity. Every general controls something. One controls the food imports. One controls the mining. One controls the ports. One controls the oil. The military is the economy. So the U.S. just cut off the head of the snake, but the body is still armed, and the body is still in charge of the money. The defense minister is still there. The intelligence chiefs are still there. The paramilitary gangs are still in the streets. This operation was a tactical success, but it is about to become a strategic nightmare. Because while the U.S. is celebrating, the rest of the world is watching in horror. Every leader in the global south, from Nigeria to Brazil to Indonesia, is looking at the headlines and asking themselves a terrifying question. If we decide to stop using the dollar, are we next? But there is one specific country that isn't just watching. They are already reacting. And their response is going to hit the American economy harder than any oil shock in history. Fear doesn't make people loyal. It makes them leave. And the exit doors are already swinging open. While Washington was planning its raid, the rest of the world was meeting in Russia. At the BRICS summit in Kazan, Vladimir Putin walked on stage and dropped a bombshell. He announced, BRICS Pay. This is a new digital payment system. It uses blockchain. And most importantly, it completely ignores the US dollar. This isn't just a PowerPoint presentation. It is happening now. Brazil is testing it to sell food. South Africa used it to sell diamonds. Iran and Russia are using it to trade weapons. And Venezuela? They just applied for membership. Think about the math. Venezuela controls 300 billion barrels of oil. If they join BRICS, that massive ocean of energy gets locked into a system that Washington cannot touch, cannot sanction, and cannot control. The transition has already happened. The world just hasn't realized it yet. China is hoarding gold like it's going out of style. They bought 225 tons in 2023 alone, and that's just what they admitted to. The real number is probably double that, hidden in secret imports through Hong Kong. They are building a fortress of gold to protect themselves from the dollar. Russia got kicked out of the Western banking system in 2022. Everyone thought they would collapse. They didn't. They just built their own system. Now, 30% of their payments happen on their own network. China launched their own version, CIPS. It's processing nearly $500 billion every single day. When you add up the new BRICS members, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, you are looking at 45% of the human population. You are looking at 72% of the world's oil. By attacking Venezuela, the United States didn't show strength. We proved Putin right. We proved Xi Jinping right. We validated every speech they ever made about American bullying. Before this raid, countries used the dollar because it was easy. It was convenient. It was stable. Now, holding US dollars looks like a liability. It means your sovereignty has an expiration date. It means your money can be frozen if you disagree with Washington. The Petrodollar used to be a trade agreement. Now it feels like a hostage situation. Donald Trump thinks he is projecting power. He thinks he is showing the world that America is back. He thinks the helicopters and the handcuffs scream strength. But to the rest of the world, it screams desperation. Real superpowers don't need to invade their neighbors to get gas. They offer the best technology. They offer the best trade deals. People want to work with them because it makes them rich. When you have to break down the door with a gun to get what you want, you aren't competing. You are looting. That is the behavior of an empire in decline. And everyone sees it. China sees it. Russia sees it. Even our friends in France and Germany see it, even if they are too polite to say it out loud. This operation was supposed to save the dollar. Instead, it might be the thing that kills it. You can win the battle and lose the war. And right now, the U.S. is staring down three very dark paths. Path 1 is the controlled transition. This is the fantasy. The U.S. makes a deal with the Venezuelan generals. We set up a new government. The oil flows north. Everyone is happy. This is the best-case scenario. It rarely happens. Path 2 is fragmentation. This is the nightmare. The government breaks apart. The generals turn into warlords. The country is split into pieces controlled by gangs and militias. The oil stops flowing completely. This is what happened in Libya. This is what happened in Iraq. Path 3 is the shadow war. This is where China refuses to accept defeat. Beijing keeps buying oil through secret channels. They fund the resistance. They turn Venezuela into an economic Vietnam, a long, expensive, draining battleground that bleeds the U.S. dry. Washington hasn't told us which path they are taking. Honestly, they probably don't know. The markets are celebrating. They think cheap oil is coming back. They think the dollar is safe. But history suggests they are wrong. Remember when they said Iraq would be quick? Remember when they said Libya would stabilize? Remember Afghanistan? Toppling a government is the easy part. It takes a weekend. Building a new one takes a generation. And nobody in Washington is asking the most important question. The question that keeps economists awake at night. What happens if this doesn't work? What happens if the oil doesn't flow? What happens if China decides to hit back? Not with guns, but with debt. Because if China decides to dump its U.S. Treasury bonds, the raid in Venezuela will look like a tea party compared to the financial crash that follows. And there is one final piece of this puzzle that explains why this crash might be inevitable. If Latin America decides that doing business with the United States is too dangerous, the game is over. Those are the stakes. We aren't just talking about oil barrels anymore. We are talking about the survival of the American financial system. And the scary part? We are way too early to know how this ends. But here is what we do know. The helicopters have already left Caracas. Maduro is on a boat somewhere in the Atlantic. The news cameras are packing up. By next week, the media will move on. They will find a new crisis. Maybe it will be Greenland. Maybe it will be Canada. Maybe it will be a tweet sent at 3 a.m. They will want you to forget Venezuela, but the world won't forget. Because something broke in Venezuela that cannot be fixed with a press release. Trust. For 80 years, the global system held together because of a simple promise. Sovereignty matters. Violence is a last resort. That promise is gone. The United States just proved that if an oil-rich country tries to leave the dollar, Special forces will show up in the middle of the night. Leaders in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East are taking notes. They realize that the petrodollar isn't a trade deal, it is a leash. And when you realize you are on a leash, you don't become more loyal. You start looking for a pair of scissors. The petrodollar era isn't ending because of Bitcoin. It isn't ending because of inflation. It is ending because the United States just admitted that the system relies on force, not friendship. And in the long run, force is expensive. You have to pay for the ships. You have to pay for the soldiers. You have to pay for the wars. Cooperation is free. Coercion bankrupts you. The world is already reorganizing. New alliances are forming in the shadows. New currencies are being coded. The tragedy isn't that change is coming. Change is always coming. The tragedy is that the United States could have led this transition. We could have been the architects of the new world. Instead, we decided to fight the future with everything we have. The raid in Venezuela was just the opening scene of a much darker movie. And if history is any guide, the next scene isn't about oil. It is about what happens when the money itself stops working. Because while everyone was watching Venezuela, a much bigger disaster quietly started unfolding in the Middle East. A decision by Saudi Arabia that guarantees the collapse of the American middle class within the next 12 months. Click this video right here. It explains exactly why the Saudi kingdom just turned its back on Washington and how that decision is going to empty your savings account faster than any war ever could. I'll see you there.